For more on Russia and Putin's State of the Nation address, I'm joined by William Courtney, former U.S. ambassador to Georgia and Kazakstan, and now with the RAND Corporation. We're also trying to effort a guest out of London, a former advisor to the Kremlin. But Ambassador Courtney, let's start with you. I would like to get your reaction to President Putin's address. You know, he warned of hard and difficult times as he addressed the Russian people. He also called for self-reliance. How do you think Russians will respond? And do you think Putin is admitting anything here?
Yes. But first let me say the Western headlines, which focus on the anti-U.S. activities, Ukraine, things like that, those are a mask for the real purpose of the speech. The real purpose, as you said, was to prepare Russians for hard times and to offer some new language about how they're going to go about it. For example, he equated economic freedoms for enterprises with patriotism. This is a new shift.
Well, what does that mean? What is he preparing the Russian people for? Obviously, we all know that the economy is in decline. Are they going to feel that soon? How much will he have before Russians start to worry?
Well, former Finance Minister Alexander Nekrassov, who resigned but was close to Putin, has been warning for some time now that there's too much bureaucratic interference in the economy. President Putin today basically admitted that. He even talked about how inspections were politicized and used by essentially criminal groups to harass enterprises. So what he needs to do is to find ways that are convincing to the markets that he can open up new economic freedoms. That didn't happen today. In fact, the ruble went down after his speech.
He also, as you mentioned, made some pretty strong statements against the West. Reading into it, how should the international community react to that? Is this a warning to them?
No, it's pretty much standard rhetoric, actually, so it's not really that significant. He is signaling, of course, that he's not going to pull back on Ukraine yet, but the combination of the sanctions, the structural economic problems which have already been weakening the economy, the detention of one of the private sector entrepreneurs, Vladimir Yevtushenkov, and then the oil price decline. But four separate reasons why the economy is going down. What Putin needs to do now is to offer a convincing new program. He needs to bring back Alexei Kudrin as prime minister. He needs to privatize a lot of state-owned enterprises which are inefficient, and he needs to release from prison thousands of entrepreneurs who've been convicted of bogus economic crimes.
Just before this address, as we mentioned, there was an attack in Chechnya. I want to ask you about the timing of that deadly attack, an area that's seen a lot of bloodshed with Russia now. Is this an area to watch again? How concerned do you think the Kremlin, behind closed doors, is about what's happening there?
Kremlin is probably quite concerned. The timing evidently was aimed at President Putin's annual speech today. But it's still not clear yet whether this is going to be a sustainable offensive by Chechen terrorists or not. In Dagestan to the east of Chechnya, the problems actually have been worse recently. So clearly the North Caucasus remains an unsettled area.
Do you think we're going to see some overflow from what's happening in the Middle East with ISIL militants moving into Chechnya?
A number of the ISIL leaders are actually Chechens. Some of them have been bragging on television that they're going to go back to Russia at some point. So this is a real issue for Russia, and it's an area where Russia and the United States have some reason for common cause.
How do you think President Putin has been able to maintain such a high level of popularity within his country despite what's happening in the economy with the ruble, with oil prices, and this recent busted South Stream pipeline deal?
Yes, in the 2000s, he became popular because the Russian economy improved. Growth rates were 7% a year on average for a number of years. But more recently, economic growth has slowed down a lot. And then in 2011, there were demonstrations, public demonstrations in Moscow against him. So as a reaction to that, he started moving in an authoritarian direction. But this has had a negative impact on the economy. And now I think he realizes he needs to change course, or otherwise popularity through populism, such as seizure of Crimea, for example, that may not be as durable as popularity he achieved through economic successes.
I'd like to bring in Alexander Nekrassov now, who joins us from London. He's a former advisor to the Kremlin. I'd like to get your reaction to that question as well. Talk about President Putin's popularity despite everything that's happening right now with Russia.
Well, first of all, I think President Putin reflects the feelings of the Russian people and especially when it comes to Crimea and Ukraine. And don't forget that in Russia, most people consider that the crisis was started by the European Union and the US specifically. And so that is why, you know, it's a completely different perception in Russia. It's not like in the West where the bit with the February coup is cut off, and then everybody is brought forwards, and then we have out of the blue the Crimean referendum, and people here don't really understand that there's a connection to what happened in Kyiv in February, where there was basically an armed coup and a legitimate government was overthrown. Now, the Western observers are saying, well, it was not a popular government and so on. But if we start overthrowing governments we don't like, you know, we will see chaos all over the place. So it's a completely different perception. We have two different views on what is happening in Ukraine.
Alexander, what was your reaction to President Putin's address? How are Russians taking it? Some of what he said was pretty candid to most observers. The fact that there are hard times ahead with the Russian economy. What is your take on it?
Well, first of all, the people understand that the sanctions are hitting Russia, and this is no secret. And I think, to be honest with you, I think that it's actually a good thing that the Russian government and the president are talking to people in a frank, open way and accepting that, yes, damage is done to the economy. Because when we see what is happening on the other side, in the Western world, everything is fine there. You know, recovery is going on and so on, when we know it's not the case. So in this case, the Russians understand that the president is open with them. And if they didn't, we wouldn't see his popularity being above 80%, right?
Well,
so another important thing to
I was just going to say, will the Russian
that,
people still support him if the economy drops even lower?
Well, first of all, I think that the reports about the Russian economy collapsing are greatly exaggerated. Don't forget that Russia, unlike Western countries, is not in huge debt. Russia has reserves, very substantial reserves of hard currency, of gold, and so on, which, by the way, Western governments don't. So to say that the economy is collapsing, that it's, you know, the ruble is in free fall and so on, it's not exactly correct. Yes, there are problems. Yes, they will be probably staying on because the sanctions are there. And of course, America is putting on pressure. Even today, there is a resolution in the House of Representatives, which is basically an anti-Russian resolution, has been adopted, calling on more sanctions, you know, and other things. So this hostility continues, and the Russian people understand that there will be results of that hostility. So they are prepared to take the consequences. But the point that Putin was making in his speech is that this is the time to respond constructively to these problems. This is not the time to give up. And I think that message will find support in Russia.
Want to get your quick reaction to what happened in Chechnya just hours before President Putin made his address. Is there cause for concern with what happened there with that attack?
Well, obviously there is cause of concern, and any terrorist attack in any country, not just Russia, this is a cause of concern, especially as we see that terrorism is on the rise across the Middle East, and then actually that influences Chechnya as well. And President Putin did make this point, that we need to deal with this problem, and I think it was dealt with, this particular incident, with determination and speed, because we had no civilian casualties, only, unfortunately, policemen, but all the attackers were killed. So, yes, it is a problem. Yes, the Russian government understands it, but a lot of it is coming from abroad as well. So that's another question that has to be tackled. Unfortunately, the cooperation between Russia and the West on fighting terrorism has been scaled down, and that's the West's, the West is to blame for that. That is very unfortunate. Hopefully, maybe that will be reinstated.
All right, Alexander Nekrassov in London. Thank you for joining us. Ambassador William Courtney here in the studio in Washington. I appreciate both of you for your time and perspective.
Thank you.